All right. Good evening, everyone. So, in light of recent events, by recent events, I mean the controversy surrounding Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines, as well as Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light, I wanted to take an opportunity to release another video. This video is a little bit different than the others that I've posted in the Bail series. And it's a video that I believe is timely. It's a video that I believe has a message that we all need to hear. And it's a video that was really sparked by a question. And the question that I asked myself today was, how come in the midst of all of the controversy surrounding the trans movement, we don't see women transitioning to men and competing in men's sports? If you look at the news, if you pay attention to social media, if you pay attention to our culture and society today, you will notice that in most cases, it is men who are transitioning into women and who are competing in women's sports. Men are transitioning into women and are dominating women's sports, and it has been a subject of much debate, chaos, and controversy in our nation. And as I began thinking about that question today, I began to ask myself, why is this so? Why is it that we predominantly and primarily see men who are transitioning into women? Why is it that when we think of the concept of drag, it is men who are dressed up as women? There has to be a reason for this. There has to be a reason beyond just what we see in the natural. And so the video that I'm posting right now is essentially based on the answer that I received as I was thinking about it, as I was meditating on it, as I was praying about it. And the underlying answer is that there is a war against men. There is a war against masculinity. There is an all-out war in our culture and in our society specifically against the male gender. And so I want to talk to you today because this war is not only fought in the natural front among flesh and blood, but it is also a war that is fought in the supernatural and the spiritual front. And I want to be very clear that the left, the radical left, is waging an all-out war against men. Despite what they say, despite how they act, despite what policies they may or may not put in place, the radical left has a controversy with men. They have a controversy with masculinity, and it is this controversy that is as old as Adam and Eve in the garden. It is as old as the creation of the heavens and the earth. And it is something that is diabolical and sinister in nature and has its roots and origin in hell. And so the video that I'm presenting to you today is why the left hates men. The war against manhood. Why the left hates men, the war against manhood. Now, in order to fully comprehend this, we have to begin in the garden. We have to begin with God's original creation. And this first point, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. It should be self-evident. It should be self-explanatory. But the first point that I want to make is regarding the divine order. The divine order established and set by God. And the divine order is male and female. The book of Genesis in the first chapter reads as follows. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. We come to the New Testament and the words of Jesus. And this is in the same context of divorce when the religious leaders came to him asking about divorce. This is what the Gospel of Matthew describes, and Jesus responds. And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? Genesis 5. This is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and blessed them and called them mankind in the day that they were created. I'm not going to spend too much time on this first point, but I will be very clear to say that there are only two genders. There are only two sexes in the world, in history, male and female. When you are born into this world, you come forth from your mother's womb. You come forth as either a man or a woman. You come forth as an infant boy or an infant girl. You do not come forth as a mistake. You do not come forth as a possibility that maybe God made a mistake and created you male when he should have created you female. We know from Jeremiah that God says specifically to Jeremiah, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. We know that David said that God knit him together in the innermost parts of his mother's womb. God knew you and I in our mother's womb. And when we came forth and when we were created as either male or female. There is no in between. There is no gray area. It is black or white, right or left, and I should say right or wrong. Male and female. This is how God created us. This is the divine order. This is the way that it always has been. This is the way that it is going to be in eternity. This is the way that we must bring our culture and our society back to today. God, in the beginning, created mankind in his image and in his likeness, and that was male and female. We have to be very clear on that and understand that there are only two genders in society today, despite what we read about non-binary, despite what we read about the LGBTQIAPQRS+, and the whole alphabet, despite what we read about the whole trans movement. At the very core of our beings is either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, either male or female. I want to keep going on about this war. There is a war against man. There is a war against masculinity. And if you study the scriptures, you will find that there is a significance in genealogy and the seed. Genealogy and the seed. This is seen as early as the 5th chapter of the Old Testament book of Genesis, where it describes these sons being born, and each subsequent generation you will read that this person begot this person. This father begot this son became a father and begot this son, and you will find it throughout the generations. You will find that Adam begot Seth, and then you will find Enosh, and you'll keep going. You'll find Enoch, you'll find Methuselah, ultimately to Noah and the days of Noah. This is what we find in the 5th chapter. The opening verse of chapter 11 in the same Old Testament book says, this is the genealogy of Shem. Genealogy in Scripture is very important because when you study genealogy, you will find that it is seed that is passed down from generation to generation, and the bearer of the seed is the male. The bearer of the seed is the man who goes into his wife, who knows his wife intimately. God allows them to conceive, and they are able to bring forth, even as Adam and Eve spoke of their first child, I have brought forth a son. I have brought forth someone in my own image. Genealogy is very important in Scripture. And when you study Scripture, especially the genealogies, you will find its connection to sons and fathers. Sons and fathers. And this is what the war is being waged in our culture and society today. There is a war against sonship, and there is a war against fatherhood. The enemy cannot stand fatherhood, and the enemy cannot stand sonship. The reason why would the enemy despise the concept of a father-son relationship? We need to look no further than the divine Trinity. We need to look no further than the Gospels when Jesus came forth as the eternal Son, speaking of this Father. He would speak of God as his Father. Not only that, but when Jesus taught us to pray, what were the first words in the prayer that he taught us? Our Father. He taught us to address and relate to and speak to God as our Father. And this is why the enemy, this is why the serpent despises the reality of fatherhood and sonship, because it is a reminder of the relationship that exists between God the Father and God the Son. It is a reminder of how much he absolutely detests that relationship, that intimacy. The enemy despises it, and he will do whatever he can to destroy either the Father or the Son. If he can't destroy the Father, he'll go after the Son. And he'll do this throughout generation and generation and generation until we come to our culture and society today when we see a all-on assault and attack on sonship and on fatherhood. Matthew, the first chapter, starts this: the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Genealogy is very important, and if you continue reading this chapter, you will find that this person begot this person, 14 generations, another 14 generations, and another 14 generations until the time of Christ. If you go to the New Testament book of Luke, you will find now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age, being, as it was supposed, the son of Joseph. If you keep reading that, and you will find that Luke traces this genealogy all the way back through history, all the way back through generations, until he comes to the final verse. The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. This is the war that the enemy is raging, because the enemy despises sonship. The enemy despises fatherhood. And the war that we are seeing being waged by the radical left against masculinity, against manhood, against young boys who are being encouraged to explore their gender identification. This is a war against fatherhood, and it's a war against sonship. Going on even further, we must recognize a war against the seed. There is a war against the seed. It is the man who carries the seed, and it is that seed that is passed down through the generations. We see this in the line of Abraham specifically. God speaks about the seed that would come forth from Abraham, and it would be Abraham, and then it would be Isaac, and then it would be Jacob, and then it would be Judah, and we find all these different realities of the seed that is being passed on. And it is the man who carries the seed. It is the man who carries the ability to release that seed when he engages in an intimate relationship with his wife. That seed is passed from the man and enters into the woman, and it is God that allows that seed to germinate and to ultimately result in conception. And this war against the seed is found in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. This is God speaking to the serpent. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. We immediately see This war against the seed that begins as early as the Garden of Eden. This war takes on a whole new level during the days of Noah. And we see this attempt to corrupt the seed. We see this attempt to defile and pollute the seed during the days of Noah. The 6th chapter of Genesis reads as follows. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. Very important, we recognize this concept of God looking down and seeing the wickedness of man. God looking and seeing this new race of individuals who were released into the earth as a result of this unholy union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. And in the days of Noah, the serpent was seeking to corrupt the seed, corrupt the bloodline in the earth. And this was what was so important about Noah, because Noah's bloodline was not defiled. Noah had not defiled himself the way that those of those days actually did. Noah was pure and upright and righteous in his generation, and this is why God chose to give him the command to build the ark, to gather together the animals into the ark, and declared to him that he and his wife and their 3 sons and their 3 daughters, 8 persons in all, would be saved during the flood. God destroyed the earth with the flood and started all over because he saw the wickedness that was present in that generation. And this same reality is true in our day today. What did Jesus say? Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. The same wickedness and abomination that was present during the days of Noah is present today. And there is a war against the seed. There is a war against the ability to transmit that seed and to bring forth life, to bring forth a new creation. Not a new creation as we understand Paul talking about in the book of 2 Corinthians, but we find a new creation as in an infant child that is brought forth into the earth. This war against the seed is seen in the Old Testament narrative of the Exodus, specifically in the days leading up to Moses and the deliverance of the children of Israel from their slavery, from their bondage and their oppression. And I want to declare that this war against men, this war against masculinity, has everything to do with population control and the war against deliverance. The enemy does not want people to be free. The enemy does not want people to be delivered. The enemy hates deliverance. The enemy hates freedom. The enemy hates victory. This is why demonic oppression and possession are so rampant in our culture and society today. In the book of Exodus, the 1st chapter, it says, Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. You go on to find that the midwives feared God. They didn't listen to Pharaoh's command. They delivered the sons as well as the daughters. And in verse 22, when Pharaoh realized what was happening, when Pharaoh realized the midwives would not obey his command, Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Why? Why would Pharaoh want the sons to be destroyed? The answer is actually found in the beginning of this chapter when you find that there arose a new Pharaoh, one who did not know Joseph. And Pharaoh saw the children of Israel and saw how they were multiplying greatly in the land. And he became exceedingly fearful. He became exceedingly anxious. I would also say insecure. And as a result of this, he sought to control the Israelite population. He was worried that they would rise up against him and overthrow him. And this is what the enemy is worried about today. The enemy is worried about people rising up who will wage war against him. Make no mistake, the enemy hates you. The enemy despises you. Even if you are not serving God and you are walking in the ways of the world, know for a fact the enemy still despises you. You may ask why. The answer is actually found in the fact that you were created in the image and likeness of God. When the enemy looks at you, he sees the image of God. He sees the likeness of God. And so in our culture and in our society today, we are seeing this same attempt at population control. There are two main ways that the radical left is seeking to do population control. The first is through abortion. If the radical left can abort as many infants as they can from coming forth, they can control the population. They can control how many people are actually present in the land. Not only this, the second way is through this trans movement. Specifically when it comes to emasculating men who feel the need to transition into women. We find population control being done through emasculation and through the removal of certain physical body parts. And what would that do? If you remove that part of a man's body, what does that automatically eliminate? It automatically eliminates the ability to procreate. It automatically eliminates the ability to pass the seed on and for God to bring forth a new creation in the earth. What does abortion do? Abortion recognizes that that seed was actually passed on, and that it resulted in conception, and it resulted in a life growing inside a womb of a mother, and so the enemy will go after that. And so we see these two sides of the same coin. These are two sides of the same war that are being waged against masculinity and against men. The enemy and the radical left are seeking to control the population, because if they can control the population, they can spread their agenda, their ideologies. They can control government, they can control religion, they can control politics, they can control business, they can control the economy. Everything is connected. Everything is intertwined together, and we must recognize this in our generation. We don't just stop here. We find that there is a war against salvation and the Christ. We find that Pharaoh desired for all of the infant boys to be killed. The reason why is because he knew that there was a deliverer that was going to come forth. There was a deliverer who would come forth, who would deliver the people of Israel from their slavery, from their bondage and their oppression. And so the enemy thought that he could actually destroy this seed, thought that he could actually prevent the deliverer from coming forth. And we know the story. Moses' mother Jochebed hid him in a basket, put him among the reeds in the Nile River. He was found by Pharaoh's daughter, and the deliverer would grow up in the same house as Pharaoh. The deliverer would grow up in the same house of the oppressor. And I believe that's a prophetic word for this generation. The deliverers, those who are going to move in deliverance and freedom in this generation, are rising up in the house of the oppressor. They are rising up underneath the hand of tyranny. They are rising up underneath the hand of oppression. And God has a remnant. Make no mistake about it. God has a remnant of men and women who will move and operate in deliverance, who will come forth, as Jesus said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news. And Jesus came to set the prisoners free. And this is a remnant that God will send forth in this generation. And this brings us to the war against salvation. This brings us to the war against the very Christ. In the 2nd chapter of the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, we find, then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Why was this mass genocide being performed at this time? The reason why is because the wise men from the east came forth speaking of one who would be the king of the Jews. And Herod saw that he was deceived. Herod wanted to destroy this one who was born king of the Jews. Herod sought to completely eradicate and eliminate him from the earth. And when he realized that the wise men had actually departed a different way and that he was deceived by the wise men, he proceeded to go on a murderous rampage and called for the destruction of all of the infant boys 2 years old and under. And this is what we must recognize, because the enemy sought to prevent salvation. The enemy sought to prevent the Christ and the Messiah from coming forth into the earth. And this is the same battle that the enemy is waging today. And this radical left agenda could not be more anti-Christ in its nature than any part of our government. The radical left is moving and operating in the spirit of Antichrist, denying that God had a son, denying that God sent his son into the flesh. John 3:16, what does it say? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The radical left is going after men. The radical left is going after masculinity. The radical left is seeking to transition men into women because it's a form of population control, because men will grow up to be fathers and to be husbands and to bring forth another generation. Men can grow up and can bring forth deliverance. They can come forth and bring forth the nature and the image of Christ. We were created in the image and likeness of God, but we are conformed into the likeness of Christ. And the enemy will do whatever he can to distort the image of God and to prevent you from being conformed into the likeness of Christ. And this is what we see in the radical left's agenda through abortion. If they can't succeed through abortion, then what they will do is they will move on to the next part of the plan, which is during childhood. And recently in the state of Washington, a bill was passed that allows the government to seize control of children if the parents do not agree and affirm to a child's gender confusion and gender transformation. The government in Washington, the state, can actually remove these children from the parents. It is demonic, it is diabolical, it is antichrist, and it is perverse through and through. And this is something we must understand in our culture and in our society. We are a nation that is storing up wrath for ourselves. We are a nation that is storing up the wrath of God. And the judgment of God is upon the door of this nation. The judgment of God is on the horizon. Make no mistake, God is not mocked. God will not be mocked. There is coming a day of judgment, and I believe that God is calling us to repentance. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. I want to close by talking about the storing up of the wrath of God. And this is what this nation is doing. This is the track and the path that this nation is on. And there's words which the Apostle Paul writes in the first chapter of the epistle written unto the saints of Rome, beginning with verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Notice suppression of truth. If that doesn't describe our culture and our society today, I don't know what is, because cancel culture is legitimately the suppression of truth. Tolerance is literally the suppression of truth and the suppression of righteousness, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them. For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Here is where I want us to pay very close attention. Verse 24. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than Creator. They worshipped and served what was created rather than Creator. And this whole trans movement is summarized in this. It is the worship of the creation above the Creator. This trans movement is essentially establishing oneself as God. It is an attempt to dethrone God from his rightful place and elevate oneself, and shaking one's fist in the face of God and saying that God does not know what's best, that God's will is not greater than my own agenda, my own plans. This trans movement is the worshiping of the creation rather than the Creator. The LGBTQ movement is the worship of the Creator rather than creation. The worship of the creature rather than Creator. The BLM movement is the worship of the creature rather than the Creator. Make no mistake about it. This is demonic and antichrist at its core. For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. This describes our culture perfectly. For, listen to this, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiter, haters of God. This couldn't describe our culture and our society more perfectly. This couldn't describe the radical left more perfectly, as they hate and despise and abhor God. And they would rather worship the Creator or worship the creature rather than the Creator. They would rather worship what was created rather than the one who created it. Violent. We see that. We've seen it in abundance over the past couple years. Violence and protest and rebellion and insurrection have been insurmountable in the last couple of years. Proud boasters, inventor of evil things. This is clearly seen in our culture and society. Disobedient to parents. This is something that even teachers are promoting, this disobedience to parents, especially when it comes to this issue of gender. There are teachers and guidance counselors that are promoting disobedience to parents, going against one of the very commandments of God that says, honor your father and mother. It is the only commandment, or it is the first commandment with a promise attached to it. Honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you all the days of your life. Undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. I want to make it very clear that there is a full-scale war against men and against masculinity. There is an all-out war that is specifically being waged by radical left, by Democrats who would like nothing more than to not only control the population, but who would also want to dominate and control the culture and the society. From the White House to the Capitol building, to the chambers of Congress, to the state legislature buildings, this is something we must recognize and must understand. I began this video by asking why we don't, or why we rarely hear of a woman transitioning into a man and competing in men's sports. The answer is because there is a war against men, there is a war against manhood, there is a war against masculinity, there is a war against fatherhood, there is a war against sonship, and it will come down, and it comes down to population control. And I want to make it very clear that abortion is demonic and antichrist at its core. This trans movement is demonic and an abomination in the sight of God. This LGBTQ agenda is demonic and antichrist at its core. And there is a need for a remnant of God to rise up in this generation and to take back the ground that the enemy has stolen. Every place that the sole of our feet has tread, that has God given unto us. And we must be those who rise up in this generation and who recognize that although there is a visible war that is taking place in the natural, the greater war is waged in the spiritual realm. The greater war is waged in the supernatural realm. And we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. And the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. I'd love to have a discussion with you. I'd love to further discuss this topic, maybe debate it, go back and forth with you. So if you would like to, please feel free to leave a comment. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to discuss this further. Go ahead and hit the like button. Go ahead and share this video with your friends, family members, co-workers, those in your inner circle. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel and click on the bell so you stay up to date with all of my latest content. I will be continuing the series on bail. This was a video that I believe needed to be released at this particular hour, but I'm going to be picking up in my next video on Jehu's war against Baal. Thanks so much for tuning in and spending time with me. God bless.